All right. In our group, we have myself, Grant Niehaus. We have Rithvik, Emmett, and Ben. And we're doing our video project on silences and conversations. And so our dominant effect for silences and conversations is Jane Austen uses silences and conversations to build tension and character development, respectively, in order to define and expand upon the relationships between characters.
Austen uses silence to build tension between Elizabeth and Darcy, as seen in this quote. After a silence of several minutes, he came towards her in an agitated manner, and thus began, "In vain I have struggled. It will not do. My feelings will not be repressed. You must allow me to tell you how ardently I admire and love you." Elizabeth's astonishment was beyond expression. She stared, colored, doubted, and was silent. Jane Austen's ability to portray silence through this scene is different than most other interactions, as instead of feeling of awkwardness and isolation, Jane Austen uses this quote to describe the feelings Darcy has for Elizabeth. This is an example of conversation that is actually meaningful, and conversation that breaks the awkward silence between the two characters.
The second example of silences in conversation is a shift in Darcy's character. This occurs when Elizabeth receives a letter from Darcy. Here, the narrator says, Elizabeth opens the letter, and to her still increasing wonder, perceives an open letter containing 2 sheets of letter paper. Here, Darcy decides to use the letter to communicate his ideas, so that he can better explain his ideas to Elizabeth. This example is where Darcy uses silence to better explain his ideas so that Elizabeth realizes that he's an extremely cautious and thoughtful person. This in turn changes his character in the minds of both the reader and Elizabeth, and here we better understand his path and how he has changed.
So another example of Austen's use of characterization can be seen in the character Darcy, as seen in this quote, saying, It could not be for society, as he frequently sat there 10 minutes together without opening his lips. And when he did speak, it seemed the effect of necessary rather than choice. And kind of some background to it is that Austen portrays Darcy as a high-level individual whose purpose at this point is to seem disinterested with people below his level. He decides not to talk, thus creating some tension between Darcy and the rest of the characters in the lower gentry, such as the Bennets. This means that Austen only has Darcy speak when he is being talked at. Darcy does not speak unless he feels it necessary. By doing this, Jane Austen characterizes Darcy as a man who does not feel the need to appease people who are below him.
One of the significant examples of characterization through conversations is when the narrator remarks on Lady Catherine de Bourgh that her ladyship, after a while, shared the feeling, was more openly acknowledged, for she did not scruple to call out. And the explanation behind this is that Austen is characterizing Lady Catherine de Bourgh as talkative and unrestrained, and it shows that, just like her word, her character is very straightforward. This also shows that Lady Catherine just drones on, while not building anything into the conversation. Finally, it shows how the conversation was completely dominated by Lady Catherine.
One of the major functions of silence in Pride and Prejudice is to build tension between the characters, as noted by the narrator. Elizabeth made no answer. She was afraid of talking longer of his friend and having nothing else to say. She was now determined to leave the trouble of finding a subject to him. Austen uses the idea of silence as negative, to the point that it strikes fear into the protagonist, as she is worried that one fatal misspoken word could be detrimental to her pride as well as her family's name. Here, Austen is also portraying a shift in the conversation from being led by Lizzie to being led by Darcy.
Whether it's through letters or awkward encounters between major characters, Jane Austen uses silences as well as conversation to build tension between major characters as they develop throughout the novel.